I'm recording. We're recording now. Thank you, about. Crack on, Chris.
Right, okay, thanks everyone, and I'm just going to quickly sort of rattle through some thought processes really about do I actually need a slurry store, and also what could possibly go wrong. So this example is from Devon, not on the Eden, thank goodness, but there's a couple of top tips here to try and remember if you're thinking about storage, and one is to check on the guidance. Sorry, yeah, so look at Syria 759A. That sounds a bit of a mouthful, but it's the construction standards for slurry stores and silage pits, and it's free to download. And what I like about it is it's mainly in pictures and diagrams and not too wordy. So if you want to think about how to construct a store that it's not going to fall over, and anybody thinking about it, although it's designed for engineers, any farmer can read that and understand it, and it's worth it. The other thing about this particular picture is that what went wrong is that none of the gutters on that building at the back there were connected. So it was a 2 million gallon store with additional water going in, and another 500,000 gallons of water pushed the whole thing over. So it wasn't built to construction standards, and it didn't deal with the fundamental problem, which is how they managed water rather than how they managed slurry. So just think about that. You know, when we look at our rainfall, we can see where we are in one of the wettest counties in England, and so water is often the problem. And we need to sometimes make sure we don't forget that, because we are going to have to stop doing this. So I'm going to cover a little bit about the farming rules for water, which came in 2018. It is the regulatory stick that's going to poke us up the backside, as well as a little bit of carrot, I suppose, with this slurry grant. So we might be looking at things like this, which is a floating cover on a lagoon in the Eden Valley. That comes with some benefits in that you're not putting that rainwater into your system, so it reduces your storage capacity, but it comes with problems in how do you agitate? Do you put a separator in? That kind of thing. But refer back to that Syria guidance. It will show you how to dig your anchor trenches, what angles to put things at, what you need in terms of you know, if you're doing clay lined, what does that mean? What does that look like? And you can see there that it's quite easy. So go and download that, Syria 759A, just Google it and have a look at that. Okay, so that's my top tip for the day. And the other thing, I suppose, is looking at when you can see your sort of soils disappearing from space, we've got a problem. We did some work, I'm not going to sort of dwell on this, but we did some work looking at suspended sediment, total phosphorus, ammonium nitrate measurements. So this is over 10 years, taking grab samples out of the river every 15 minutes for basically 10 years on the River Eden. And when those red lines, which are cumulative curves, are going up, that's when we're losing valuable nutrients. But I ran the calculations on what these nutrients are worth off the farm, and they're quite frightening. So this is an average set of figures for the Eden Valley in today's prices of fertilizers. So sediment hasn't gone up much in price, but they don't make it. It doesn't grow on trees. When we're losing soil, we're losing the asset value of the farm, and it's being denuded faster than it can be replaced. Phosphate, maybe not great shakes, even at increased phosphate prices. Potash the same, but it's really ammonia. We measured ammonium and nitrate separately, but put them together because we use them as ammonium nitrate. You're looking at an average. This is an average cost of £214 a hectare in today's fertiliser prices, going straight down the river every year, and most of it is in the winter. So if you add on a little bit for volatilisation of ammonia, then you're looking at £230 a hectare. So just think about that. 100 hectare farm on average in the Eden, but you can do anywhere in Cumbria, is going to be potentially losing 23 grand a year in terms of lost nutrients. And you know, it's not easy making money. So, you know, if you think about just even every tanker load, you know, looking at about 80 quid a tanker load now, and you can save a lot more, especially not just about changing how you spread it, but just that fundamental value. So farming rules for water, hopefully most of you are familiar with this, but rule number 1 is about making sure that you are using the nutrients that are required. Now, when you're thinking about slurry storage, and if we're putting a floating cover on a lagoon, you might want to, for example, put in a separator. A separator would enable you to rebalance phosphate indices across the farm. So a lot of dairy farms historically have ended up with high phosphate indices on sandy loam soils near the farm building because they're easier to get to, easier to spread in winter. And we've ended up with high phosphate indices. And then further away from the farm on silage ground, on possibly clay loamy soils, those indices are fairly starved. We've got 1s and 0s. So, you know, when you're thinking through the implications of changing slurry storage, thinking about covers, that kind of thing, you might want to also think about separators as a way of putting more of the phosphate back in the solid element. And then because slurry, it's quite difficult to say, well, I only want the ammonium nitrate out of this slurry. It all comes as a one size fits all, but separators might be a way to do that. But you do need to demonstrate with both soil testing and your nutrient management plans that you are applying the right levels of nutrients, be that through slurry or artificial fertilizers or manures, for crop requirement. So rule number 2 is about storing organic manures, and they should not be stored within 10 meters of fresh waters or 50 meters of a spring. So this applies to both manures and slurries. Rule number 3, this is kind of the killer really. You are not to spread organic manures or fertilizers if the soil is waterlogged, flooded or snow covered. And at the moment we are oscillating between frozen and waterlogged. That's kind of one of the things in winter. So both the pictures below are constituting a fence under farming rules for water. And it's quite difficult to hide it. Doesn't matter if you go and spread it at night. The next day when everything's cold and frosty and you can see great black marks all over fields, you know, everyone can see what's happened. So yeah, it's in there in the rules. And the Environment Agency does have enforcement tools to make life difficult for you. So yeah, we have to bear that in mind. Rule number 4, about where you cannot spread organic manures: within 10 meters of fresh waters or within 50 meters of a well or a borehole. I'm not dwelling on this because we've got quite a bit to get through, but just a quick romp through this. And don't apply a manufactured fertilizer within 2 meters of a watercourse. So rule number 6, reasonable precautions to prevent soil erosion. And the picture in the middle there, we've got a grass reseed, which capped surface, which led to the water running off out the gate and straight through an arable stubble, which then took 200 tons of soil out of the arable stubble, which then went straight into a triple SI. So that wasn't a good day, and it only took about 2 hours for that whole thing to happen. But you must take reasonable precautions to prevent soil erosion. So it's thinking about how you cultivate. Over-cultivated land does tend to cap and slump, especially on kind of lighter soils. But you have a responsibility to prevent that. And also rule number 7, protecting against soil erosion by livestock. So these kind of scenes, in catchment sensitive farming, we talk about source, pathway, receptor. And in both of those pictures, the source of the problem, the pathway, and the receptor, i.e. the river or the watercourse or the burn, are in close proximity. And so we've got to kind of put a stop to all of that. Last rule, sorry, it's a bit of a rush through here, is that we are not to position livestock feeders close to inland waters or springs, wells or boreholes. Okay. So very quickly then, thinking about, do I need slurry storage? Because you've got really 2 options. You can either exclude water if rainwater is your problem, or you can expand storage. It's one of those two options, really. So here's a farmer who's, I hope you can spot the deliberate mistake here, but here's a farmer who's put a roof over a collecting yard. But I am just going to highlight the obvious flaw in this plan, which is the cheapest grant of all. And the best value grant in my book is guttering, which is £11.40 a metre. And you can see the consequences of not actually sorting out the little bit of repair work that needed doing there has meant that the collecting yard is far from dry, and we've got rainwater that's turning itself into slurry very quickly. So it's a simple thing to put right, but it's so often the bit that's missed. So my top tip, apart from read the Syria guidance, is look for the simple things, such as guttering, before you reach for roofing. So the grants are standard rates. Most of you are familiar with that. So say guttering was £11.40 a metre, roofing is £62 a square metre. And the grants are all kind of standard rates. So you can pick and choose those and work out how much of your problem is actually rainwater. I'm going to go quickly through a case study where we looked at an upland beef unit. It's about 80 cows in a cubicle shed on self-feed clamp silage. And, you know, he had about, let's say, 60 inches of rainfall and about 1 month storage in a slurry store. And we looked at it and thought, well, you know, this the rainwater on the outside surfaces here is turning this into slurry. But if we put a roof over the silage pit, which was at that time, about 5 or 6 years ago now, cost of 70,000 to get that roof on. It's quite a big investment, but that changed things. So here's what it looks like from above. We've got a manure store to the sort of top right of the picture, which is quite fairly small. And then we expanded that and put a roof over it to keep it dry. And then on the other side, you can see that silage pit there next to the slurry store, put a roof over that. And what happened then was that he went from about 1 month storage in that small tin tower to 4 months storage, because he just simply took the rainwater out of the equation. And then that gave him some cost savings in terms of available nitrogen, because he was able to spread it in the spring when the grass actually wanted it. He then found that the cows ate one less bay of silage because they weren't using so much. I'm wearing my hat today to reduce my heat consumption, but you know, it's when it's cold and wet in the winter and it's windy, you don't appreciate how much those animals are burning up just to maintain body weight. So he found that his silage, he could value that. He found improved conception rates in his cows. He said 40 carry passengers. And sorry, there's a bit of an echo there, so just check that you've got muted. Yeah, and he found, of course, that he wasn't spreading slurry, so his soil improved, his productivity improved. All round, this return on investment, coming to think about it, the last thing was actually to harvest the rainwater. Now we've got a big roof on, so he didn't have the water bills. It turned out that we're looking at, you know, £9,000 a year savings, which without any grant was about a 7-year payback, but with grant that halved it to about 3.5 years, which is a good return on investment. And you know, if you get a return on investment in under 5 years in farming, you generally think you're doing quite well. So my point here, and I'm nearly at the end, so you'll be pleased to know, is that for some farms, racing down another slurry scheme, especially if your cubicle sheds are absolutely knackered, and the slurry system's knackered as well, you may be better to remember that when you buy an Arctic load of straw in, you're buying potash in a potash fertiliser in a bale format rather than a bag format, and that may have increased benefits to the soil health and other things that you need to factor in to the equation, rather than, you know, potentially investing in another slurry system might be flogging a dead horse. One thing we just want to try and avoid is, you know, the consequences of winter spreading. This is an extreme example, but this is exactly what the problem is, that it's destroying productivity through the autumn and the winter, absolutely destroying soil health. which means that the soils just don't warm up in the spring, and they don't produce what they need to do, and we're basically, in a system of revolving, losing money. This particular store, this is one that I liked actually. You can see baffles on the left-hand side, so there's cubicle shed in a beef unit. By roofing the store over, and it's got a slope to the floor, so you can see that the liquor is actually running to the front, but it's contained within the store because it falls down to the back of the store. But it's still largely stackable, so it's classed as farmyard manure rather than slurry. And this has been, particularly in the beef sector, a sort of big kind of question mark. Well, actually, can we manage with farmyard manure, which might actually be a better product for our soils than slurry? So yeah, that was it really. That's I'm going to stop there. So I've rattled through that very quickly.
That's brilliant, Chris. Thank you very much. It's great to see how you've highlighted the potential non-compliancy sort of issues, but even better that you can put some pound, shilling and pence on some of those issues. So I'll throw it open to the meeting. Has anybody got any questions or comments for Chris? You've stunned them into silence, Chris.
That's right. Yeah, sorry, I probably ran too quickly, but I mean, those costings that I worked out on that farm, they were pre the cost of steel going up. So that £70,000 investment might be over 100 grand now, but it was also pre the fertiliser price going up, which would change it. But it wouldn't actually change, if I run the calculations again, it wouldn't actually change the return on investment. There'd still be about 3 to 3.5 years to actually ditch the whole slurry scheme altogether. And this is where there are lots of things to think about, and hopefully, with Andy's side of this in a moment, going through the calculations, things to think about is, well, if you have to, remember you're going to have to put a cover on a slurry store if you're going to do a slurry store. So if you've got a position on your farm where you need that rainfall to thin your slurry down, to make it pumpable and shiftable, and if you're having to put water into your slats to move that slurry into a slurry store, it is time to just stop for a moment and think, well, is this the right thing to do? I'm adding water into a situation which then has a cost to shift, and fuel has gone up in price as well. It's not just fertiliser. So actually, quite a few farms I've been on recently, particularly in the beef side, have looked at it and thought, well, if I'm looking at these tired old cubicles, rather than repair them, I'm actually going to take them out and just go with a straw-based system. So it's a bit of decision time, really. There's quite a lot to go through before concluding that a new slurry system, which itself will wear out in another 30, 40 years, is the right way to go.
Great. Last chance for any comments or questions. There's nothing in the chat. Nobody. Well, thanks for that, Chris. Stay on the line because I'm sure there'll be something to come in just a little while. Right now, we'll hand over to Andy, who's going to talk us through the application stage 1 process and perhaps a bit more on the farming rules for water. Andy.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Yeah, I'll deal with the Slurry Infrastructure grant, and then, if there's any more pertinent questions that Chris or I can answer on farming rules of water, we'll deal with those as we kind of go on. I'll just try sharing my screen just now and see whether this is going to work. Bear with me a second.
Hey, go lie down. Yeah, so we just need the PowerPoint, the slideshow.
How's that looking, Adam?
We've got your presentation with the slides on the left. We haven't got it as a slideshow. So have you tried pressing the from the beginning button?
Yep.
Right. So that's not happened. So we could either, apologies for the dog barking. The postman always knocks you in the middle of a meeting.
Yeah. Are you happy just to share that PDF, Adam? Then I can just work on that. Yeah.
That's the best I can do there.
Okay, right. We'll see where we go from here. Okay. And I'll need you to move that forward, Adam, if that's okay. Yeah. There we go. Okay.
Is that right?
Yeah. Just give me 1 second.
Oh, I've gone to 4. Hang on a second. Let me just couldn't see it. So there we go. How's that? That must be right, is it?
That's better. There we go. That's
Apologies.
great. Okay, wonderful. Okay. Right. Okay, yeah. So the scheme entered on the. I say thanks to Chris and to Adam. The scheme opened on the 6th of December, and we're now looking at something which is very much sits within the Clean Air Strategy from 2019 and the Agricultural Transition Plan for the Slurry Infrastructure Grant, what was originally called the Slurry Investment Scheme, but has now been rebadged as this grant scheme. We've got until the end of January. I'll talk about a bit more to get our note of interest in. And the strong recommendation at the moment is that if you know you're going to need more storage, and you're going to want that 6-month storage, is to get your hat in the ring now, because it's the only way we can let DEFRA and the other partner organisations know just what the demand is going to be now and in the future for slurry storage within our area. And we'll come to the target areas in a minute. Okay. As it says there, the scheme will fund your tank, lagoon or concrete store and the infrastructure to go along with it. Not separators, they're covered under the Farming Equipment Technology Fund at the moment. And the plan is that you want to aim for 6-month storage or more, but you'll only be funded to take you up to that 6-month storage capacity. And any additional storage or enhanced storage will have to have an impermeable cover, unless you're installing a slurry bag, or if you fancy going down the acidification route. Okay, Adam. At the moment, the only people that can apply, as it says there on the screen, are pig, dairy or beef farmers. At some point in the future, we anticipate that other farmers at the bottom of that screen, poultry, arable, or those who want to put in storage for, say for anaerobic digestate or for sewage sludge, will be able to do so at some point in the future, but that's too far away at the moment. Okay. So to be able to apply, you mustn't have 6-month storage on farm already. If you can, when you've done your calculations, if you can work out you do have 6-month storage, as you said, you followed Chris's advice to get all that rainwater that you can out of the system, then you don't need to have, this scheme is not for you. You have to be producing slurry already, so you can't change your farming practice to go onto farmyard manure. You must have a slurry-based system to start off with. And as I said at the start, you must plan to use store to contain only slurry, not digestate or anything else. And as it says there, you can apply if you don't have enough storage today to comply with either SAFO, which is the silage, slurry and agricultural fuel oil regulations, or the nitrate bundle zone regulations. And at this stage, your data will not be passed on to the EA. So putting your hat in the ring at this stage doesn't mean that you're sort of then opening yourself up if you haven't got a minimum capacity for storage at the moment. This is very much an information gathering exercise and seeing if you're going to be eligible. Okay, thanks, Adam. Okay, so this is what's covered, or what's covered by the grant. it's probably easier to talk about what's not covered. So if you've got an existing in situ concrete block store, similar to the one that Chris had in this first picture, then something like that is not eligible. It's got to be, either a precast or above ground steel store or a lagoon. You can use existing tanks underneath your store, underneath your sheds to work out what your current storage capacity is, but the grant will not pay for additional under shed storage capacity, as it says at the bottom there, and it won't pay for small or temporary storage within slurry bags if that's the way you want to go. Any new or enhanced storage has to be covered by a flexible cover, and that must be fixed.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, certainly.
Why are slatted floor stores not covered?
I don't know. We've asked the question, and at the moment, DEFRA is not prepared to. Chris might be able to help, but Chris is not looking to fund at this stage under shed storage capacity. So you can use that to count towards your existing capacity, but you can't install new stores to then fit within the grant. It has to be covered store. I would guess possibly, Chris, that it may well be linked that under stores are potentially going to release more ammonia or continue to ammonia contributions, whereas a covered store out with the shed is then contributing to that reduction in ammonia.
I think what they tried to do was simplify it in DEFRA's minds to say, well, you can have these types of stores, and the underground in shed slatted stores need not necessarily continue to emit more ammonia. The critical thing with ammonia is reducing air flow and air interaction. So you can have low emission slats, which will deal with that quite well. But I think that they were concerned about farmers potentially expanding operations, and they wanted to give a clear signal. This is not about expanding, putting up a new shed and putting in new slatted stores underneath and then increasing housing capacity. And I think what they've done is a very blunt tool to steer clear of any potential. I mean, it is written in the rules that it's not there for increasing herd sizes or intensifying production, but you could argue that it's to leave out one kind of critical part of the toolkit is disappointing.
So
can we, ladies and gentlemen, can we hold the questions for now and let Andy get through his presentation, and then we'll deal with all the questions at the end of it, just so that we can let him stick to theme. Is that okay with you guys?
Yeah, fine.
Brilliant, thank you. We'll come back to you. Right, so I'll.
Okay. Thanks, Adam. As I said at the start, any ancillary equipment that's associated with that enhanced or new storage should be covered by the grant. And the thing, I'm not going to cover the list here, that's to go and have a look at another day. But essentially, there's grant towards the covering of installing new reception pits, pumps, pipe work, any transfer channels and agitators that you may need, plus also safety equipment, fencing and platforms. Okay, thanks, Adam. Okay, so it uses a standard cost system that you get a fixed cost towards the item, and you can go onto the online checker to work this out. I've got some basic figures coming forward in another slide in a minute. And at the moment, DEFRA is saying these are equating to 50% of an assessed market cost of that product. And there's a different standard cost for each type of equipment, which means you don't have to go for the 3 quotes side of things, as you would do possibly under other schemes. It's basically that is what you're going to get towards your storage. The minimum spend will have to be 25,000 from your perspective, because it's a 50% intervention and the grant scheme starts at 25,000. So that's the minimum you're going to have to spend, up to a maximum of 250,000. And again, this, like every other grant scheme, this requires cash load. So your grants are paid in arrears. Okay. So this is the figures that DEFRA has at the moment. You can see on the screen there, different ones for different types of structure, and again for different types of cover. Okay. So as you've done your calculations, as Chris says, in terms of getting your rainwater out as much as you can, sorting out what you're going to need, you can use this grant, as I say, to replace existing stores, so that if they're no longer fit for purpose, no longer SAPO compliant, then you can put a brand new store in. You can create additional storage, so that adds to your existing capacity, or you can expand your existing store, but your store again must be SAPO compliant. So if you're going to put another ring on your tower and then put a cover on the top of it, then you've got to make sure that that structure is fit for purpose and is going to last for the time scale that you require it to do so. It says there you can go beyond the 6-month storage capacity if you want, but you have to fund that yourself. So the application process: online checker, closes at the end of January, and basically you put in the basic details there. It's a relatively straightforward process to do, and then once you've done that and submitted that to DEFRA, they will then assess your eligibility, and then they will call through for those who they then want to take through to the second stage, which is then you need quite a lot more information to get through to that. And the final deadline for submitting that is 18 months away in terms of June 2024. Okay, thank you. So it's not a countryside stewardship scheme, as it says there. It is expected that the demand will be incredibly high, and this is supposed to be hopefully a phased program, which will then move forward with separate application windows as we go on. The initial prioritization will be in areas where action, as it says, is urgently needed, and we'll come to a map in those at the moment for Cumbria. And I'll talk a bit about how you can go and search for those. And then basically, if you're not successful, then it doesn't mean you're going to be barred from putting it again. DEFRA, at their webinar last week, we couldn't get out of them as to whether they would hold your details and then ask you again, or whether you might need to submit a new application. But just because you're not picked up in this round doesn't mean you're not going to be picked up in another round in the future. Okay, thank you. So this is the priority areas at the moment. That's basically showing England as it is. And then the next slide, Adam, I think should drill down to Cumbria. Yeah, so again, using magic.gov.uk, you search on the land-based schemes and then other schemes, and then there's a separate tab for Slurry Infrastructure grant, and that gives you the sort of view of Cumbria. And then the next slide, you can then scroll in, put your postcode in, and bring yourself down to your own particular farm to see whether you're in or out of that blue area. But as I said, this is a targeting area for DEFRA to assess the initial round, and there's nothing to stop you at all putting your application in now to ensure that if it is undersubscribed or there's more funding comes forward, that you have your hat in the ring. Okay, thank you. So yeah, application process, as I say, online checker has to be done by the 31st of January, and then there'll be a short list, and then there'll be a check by DEFRA in terms of eligibility. And I think at that stage it gets passed over to your team then, Chris, doesn't it, in terms of catchment sensitive farming, at that stage, to then assess that for its viability, and then meets all the requirements, and then you'll be asked to submit a full application. And Chris might just explain a bit more of that if we've got time at the end. That full application will require planning, will require you to submit your other bits of information, such as your design, your location of your store, the Slurry Wizard, and all the information which I'll come to just now. Okay, Adam. So yeah, the initial one is straightforward. Most people should be able to come up with this fairly quickly in terms of your business, how it's structured, where you're located, and there. And then next stage is to put in your 6 months capacity, which I'll say will come to in a minute in terms of the Slurry Wizard. And this is to either replace add on to existing or to expand existing. Okay, and I say having gone through that stage and then gone through to Chris and his team, and the EA are also involved as well. This is very much an EA-driven scheme as well as catchment-sensitive farming. You will then have to supply much more information. You'll have to supply your Slurry Wizard calculation, which I'll come to in a minute. As I say, details about the store, where it's going to be, the size. You're going to have to provide details, drawings of it, provide details of your existing stores, provide maps of your farmyard area to show that you have done, as Chris said, in terms of getting your clean and dirty water separate as much as possible there, and showing your drainage plans. And then you've also got to show evidence of how that project's going to be funded. So that could be like we do in Stewardship, in having an accounts letter, or having something from your bank to say that you've got sufficient funds either available or cash flowable, or a bank loan to move the project forward, because you are going to have to pay for it up front. I think it's 3 claims. You're allowed a maximum of 3 claims, I think, Chris, at the moment under the current start. So you can't just go and get little chunks at it. You've got to go and submit up to 3 claims, and that's your maximum before you then submit that final. Your third one is your final one. Say you've got to have a plan in place to say how you're going to deliver this, so which bits you're going to do when. Confirmation of planning permission. And that may require, or almost and certainly will require, something called a scale assessment, because of a sensitive site. So again, you've got to factor in that you've then got to assess the ammonia emissions from your new store, and what impact that would have on the sensitive site, which are close to you. And then you've got to have a signed declaration that your store will be built to the correct, that Syria regulations and design. Okay. Thank you. So we'll talk a little about the Slurry Wizard, which is where you sort of put your figures in and work out where you are in terms of your 6-month storage capacity. You may have done this already, but we are told we have to use the Slurry Wizard. We can't use Planet, we can't use Mana or any of the other paper-based ones. We have to use this system to submit the information to DEFRA. Okay, thank you. So apologies, this might be a bit small on some people's screens, but it's a series of tab spreadsheets in terms of existing data entry. So you add in the information about your farm, the area, and it calculates your rainfall based on your telephone STD code. So if it's Penrith area, then it's a 01682 or 3 or 4 or whatever. And then you can have the option of putting in your own rainfall figures later on if you have those to hand as well. Basic livestock details in the first page, and then the second page then asks you for more specific breakdown of livestock numbers, in which category they are, and also the percentage of time they spent producing slurry into the system. So these are all key things which you've done these part of Planet as an NVZ requirements. You'll be very familiar with. Those who aren't in NVZs may not have sort of gone to this approach in the past. Okay, next slide, Adam. Thank you. Okay. So initial data entry, those slides seem to go out of order, apologies. So the data entry is you put in your basic farm details and your slurry storage capacity, existing storage capacity, and it's split into earth bank lagoons and then the concrete or circular stores. You can add stores together because there are only a limited number of entries on this spreadsheet. So if you have more than 5 or 6 separate lagoons or whatever, then you can add them together and then put that entry in, because what we're trying to do here is calculate your storage capacity. It's not particularly relevant as to where they're located on the farm. It's more about making sure that you calculate your existing capacity. Okay, thank you. I say that's the next stage. Sorry, next slide, Adam. Must be a double up slide. Yeah. So then, having put that information in, it goes through to the final thing, which is your Slurry Wizard report. And this is where you can then change some of the details that you go in. Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah, so old rainfall data might be much more accurate if you've got it, but you can put in things. So if your herd is housed all year round, then you need to make sure that you've got the boxes ticked there. So that fourth box down which says percentage excreta, there, if your cattle are in all time and they're all on slurry, make sure that you have something in all those boxes. And again, further down where you've got things like storage requirement, that's sort of 6 or about 8th line down, that will not fill in automatically. It will give you 6 months as yes, but if you need storage capacity, you know, for the whole year, then put that in. And then it will automatically calculate for you your capacity there, shown in that bottom line at the bottom there, capacity less production in cubic meters. And then below that, it will tell you if you have, based on the information you've put in there, 6 months storage capacity. The next page, please. This is what happens if you haven't. It will then flash red lights at you and tell you, and what I did was just kept the same parameters on this, but took a store out of this farm's equation, and therefore this farm is only compliant for 3/4 months of the year. So therefore then needs to add storage capacity in at that stage. And the figures in the bottom are cumulative. So if you go back to the other slide, Adam, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you. Yeah, so once you get beyond the 6 storage, so where you see it says May, June, July, August there, it's then adding cumulative figures into there to give you the maximum at the far right that you're under in terms of your capacity. So this farm is compliant at 6 months storage, but if it wanted to put more in, then it could do, and therefore could turn all those figures black. But that farm could potentially then continue to spread, you know, through the spring and the summer and the early autumn, as long as ground conditions permitted, to keep that slurry, you know, volume, you know, within restrictions. Okay. I think that, yeah. So last slide, I think now, before we go to final questions, is you've got to maintain 6 months storage capacity, and you've got to maintain that for 5 years. This is a grant scheme that will then insist that you continue this on for 5 years, such as we do with Stewardship, with mid-tier. You've got to keep your slurry store covered. So therefore, anything that's in the grant scheme, so that's new, enhanced, or additional, has to have a cover on it. But your existing storage does not at this stage have to be covered. It's just purely what you're putting into the grant scheme. And you also have to complete a nutrient management plan based on up-to-date sampling, which we should all be doing as part of farming rules for water anyway. So this is a sort of an additional, you know, compliance in this, but effectively, you know, just enhances what regulation is there already. Okay, I think that is me. Thank you.
Brilliant. And just as you finish, Andy, my dog starts barking again, which is absolutely par for the course. So thank you very much for that brief but thorough run through. Open it up to the floor now for questions. Anybody got any questions or comments? Now's your chance. We've got about 13 minutes left, and we'd love to have your comments or any questions. We've got Alistair with his hand up. Alistair.
Hello, can you hear me now? Can you hear us?
Yes, we can hear you. Yep.
All right, Grant. Can I ask Andy, I'm up in the Wigton area and looking at the magic map, a lot of dairy farms qualify because they've got triple SIs, they qualify because they're in air quality and water quality, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of the slurry grants available in that area. Is there a reason for this, or does he know anything about it?
Yeah, Chris could probably expand on that. I think he put it in the chat, is that it's been targeted on very specific areas within the SSE triple SI at the moment.
So yeah, Alistair, I had a look at this and I thought, well, that's weird, isn't it? Because it looks like a chunk of the River Eden and the River Derwent are covered, and they are triple SI SAC rivers. The Waver and the Wampool in the Wigton area are not triple SI SAC rivers. They are failing under the Water Framework Directive, which is why they're targeted for phosphates and sediment, and sometimes FIOs as well. What they therefore have done is to take the river triple SI SAC status plus the protected sites. So you're thinking of Wedham Flow and all the Solway mosses, for example, and where those things combine both water quality and air quality, they've put those as the the target areas, if you like. I put in the chat that if you expand that out and look at England as a whole, if you look at Devon, for example, where there are a lot of dairy farms, there's barely any of Devon that falls into the target area, and yet they are going to apply for this. I would say, I don't know if it answers your question really. It doesn't justify it particularly. It's just this is what they've decided to do in this first round. Is if you're looking at a farm and you think, well, the answer to our issues on this farm is we're going to have to address slurry storage. Well, then just apply. Doesn't matter that it's not in the target area, just apply. Because if DEFRA think that nobody needs this grant, they will kind of go away, go, oh, well, we don't need it. We don't need to put more money into it. If the demand is high, and if the solution to your farm's problems rests in fixing the slurry thing, if you don't ask, you will not get. That's as simple as that. So I know that certainly my CSF colleagues in Lancashire, where there's, again, virtually no targeting high target areas, that they're going to apply anyway. So yeah, does that help, Alistair?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I have two farmers that are joined in triple SIs that both have slurry issues. One's looking at a slurry bag at present moment in time, which I've sort of got a bit of information from him about, which seems to be quite a good answer to the solution because it's going to contain everything. And the other one is surrounded by Wedham Flow triple SI. And we've been talking with the triple SIM at Boston about it. And trying to address through a mid-tier some of the issues, which we're getting those, but it's not addressing the slurry issues. So it was a bit concerned when you look at two quite substantial farmers around the Wedham Flow that weren't qualifying, but that's answered the question. Thank you. Could I ask another question?
You certainly can, Alistair. Fire away.
Well, if somebody works out in Slurry Wizard that they have 2.5 or 3.5 months storage, but they thought they had 4.5 months storage, but dirty yards and things like that are now starting to affect their storage, will it bias their application for the slurry grant?
Not at all.
No, not at all.
I'm right back at the beginning of when DEFRA started talking about this. I made it quite clear to them that so many farmers were not with compliant storage, and they might be even in MVZ. And they said, right, yeah, we recognise that. That's the reality. So we're not going to got points off people for not being quite where they thought they were. The advantage of this is if you go through the process and do those calculations, and I know there's a few question marks over rainfall figures and things like that, it's going through the process and thinking, well, actually, what is this? How much storage have I got? And then work from there and think about what this investment, how important this investment is to the farm. Because remember those figures that I gave you in terms of what that slurry is worth. If we're blowing it over a dike in a winter, it's all pretty well wasted. So you just work it out almost as if I would work it out as if there wasn't any grant. I would still look at it as, is this the thing that I need? Is this the investment that I need? Yes, it would take a longer return on investment, but it's still the right thing to do. So yeah. So don't worry about
a lot of people are wanting to do it, but it's just that initial surge of thinking it's going to cost me 250,000 to do this. Ideal world, everybody wants to do things right. It's just practicalities of the business and cash flow, really.
Well, just think about that. Your 250,000, let's say 250,000 investment, but if you're losing £25,000, you're blowing it over the dike, and it's either volatilising or running off into water, which is around about where we're at in those figures.
Yeah.
In 10 years, you've done it. Even if it was a 10-year return on investment, yes, it's a lot of money, and interest rates have gone up. And I'm not denying a whole lot of barriers and difficulties, which is why we haven't done it up to now. But you look at the price of the fertiliser just now, it's eye-watering, and I would argue potentially crippling farmers long term. This does at least give us an opportunity to have a think about it. The thinking about it doesn't cost the money. It's signing the checks and writing the checks that cost the money.
Yeah, thank you.
Could I ask a question, Adam?
Yes, please do.
Right, so on my farm, I've got 3 months slurry storage, and I'm on the edge of a SSI river, and I've got cattle in cubicles, and I've got cattle on slatted floor with rubber mats, and I've got cattle in straw housing. And for me, the most efficient solution is a slatted floor shed with a slurry store underneath it, I feel. But what should I do at this point now? Should I be thinking about something different that'll qualify for the grant scheme, or pursue what I bought in the first place?
Oh, that's a good question, and I'm really glad you asked that. Well, I'm not, but I am, because I think this is going to a question that a lot of people are going to be thinking exactly the same. So thank you for asking the question on behalf of quite a few others. Andy, you might want to come in on this as well, but my first thought would be actually do the calculations on both. Let's suppose, and this is why I'm wary about grants, because sometimes they push you down the path that you don't really want to go down. If the final answer to you is going to be, the best thing's going to be a slatted store in a shed rather than a new external store, do the costs on your slatted store in the shed as if, because there's no grant on that. The only thing that there is grant on, potentially, but we could have a chat about this offline, is the slatted floors. Because if you're doing low ammonia slatted floors, they are available under countryside stewardship options now. So you could factor in a little bit of that cost that could be grant aided, but essentially do that, but then also do the calculations if you put up an independent store and see how that works out. Because coming back to the kind of, if you don't ask, you don't get kind of scenario, that's what we're faced with. And then look at how those two options pan out over time, because you're not looking just at the initial cost of investment, you're looking at the cost of running the scheme longer term. So you kind of you want to look at what's the payback on these investments rather than just the initial cost. And
then will you be, if I continue with the straw housing, I'm currently spreading every week my muck straight onto the field, and really I should be storing it for winter. Will I be able to get a grant on a midden sort of thing, do you think?
Yeah, and yes, I said yes, with a slight caveat here. The grant rules are very clear that covering middens is for covering existing middens and not new middens. So you've got to think about, well, if you're simply spreading it through winter, and you think, well, actually, no, this isn't really a sustainable route. What I need to do is store this. So you would need to sort of create a store. Doesn't have to have a roof on it. Obviously, there's effluent issues to deal with in the short term, but you can certainly come and talk to me about, right, okay, well, I know that the sustainable solution for this is I'm putting a store in. You'd need to get that in fairly quickly, because we don't know how long the countryside stewardship grants. We know that we've got them for next year, but we would certainly need to be making decisions about that in the next 5 or 6 months.
Right. Yeah, thank you.
Is that okay, Mark? Yeah.
Yeah.
Brilliant, thanks. So we've got time for one last question. Alistair's the man with his hand up, so back to you, Al.
Thank you, Adam. Can I just ask a question? We've got precast rectangular concrete panels. I have a client that's going to be constructing a circular 500,000 gallon lagoon, hopefully with the aid of the slurry. It doesn't have to be rectangular, it's just the actual panels that are rectangular, isn't it? Because obviously a circular one, he's able to put a TP type cover on top of it, whereas the rectangular ones haven't been designed yet.
Yeah, that's right. Is effectively is go for either panels that you're then putting into, you know, a rectangle, or building a precast concrete store, you know, with a band round about it, then that you then can put a store, you know, put a roof over, as you've said, Alistair, there. But
well, all it was is they're not going to get penalised with somebody going forward if it's a rectangular concrete panel, but it's made into a circular tank. Because obviously the difference between a circular concrete one and a rectangular panel is almost double. So we don't want any comeback at a later point, because it is the actual rectangular panels we're using to create a circular tank.
What you just need to make sure, though, Alistair, is that it's therefore very, very clear that you have to pass the planning, the SAFO regulations, and remember that Syria guidance. I would have a quick look at that Syria guidance on precast concrete circular towers, because I think there's something in there about that. It needs to be, you know, if you're buying those precast panels and from a manufacturer, that they're designed specifically for slurry stores, and it's about the sealant and how they're bonded together, and how they're you know, I have seen towers that are rectangular panels and then with a kind of wire strapping around the outside, and you can hear the wires starting to ping after a few years, you know, as they're like the fourth bridge. So you know, you need to make sure that they are going to be kind of guaranteed to last for 25 years, and that is a part of the deal with the grant scheme. Well,
he's been reassured by the people that are supplying them that they will, but obviously these companies come and go. So
yeah, that's true.
Yeah, thanks.
Brilliant. Okay, it's 1 minute past 1, so we haven't done so bad in terms of timekeeping. If any of you did have any more questions or wanted more information, the good news is we're going to have an in-person meeting on the 11th of January, which is going to be at the Hired Lad at Penrith, in Penrith Auction Mart. So we're going to actually do this in person again, if you'd like to, interested in coming along and being part of that. A big thank you to Andy and Chris for giving us their time today and their expertise and their knowledge on a pretty complicated and difficult subject, as most things are nowadays. And a final thanks to Egan District Council, who have been funding quite a lot of farm business support work through a programme we're running for them, and we're really grateful for their support and their funding. So it just remains for me on behalf of the Farmer Network to say thank you very much for coming to our meeting. We'd like to do more of these in future. And on behalf of the network, a very Merry Christmas to you all. Thank you all for attending the meeting.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Cheers. Bye-bye.